to How I Got Here, the inside stories of startups and innovation in travel and transportation, with your hosts, PhocusWire's Kevin May and Mozio's David Litwak. Hello and welcome to How I Got Here, Mozio and PhocusWire's podcast about innovators in travel, transportation, and hospitality. Today we're joined by Avi Brosh. Avi is the founder and CEO of the Palisociety brand, a collection of about 18 boutique hotels across the United States that seek to deliver top-tier service while also being centers of their community. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Kevin, so much for having me today. Looking forward to sharing my story and hopefully some we'll find it interesting.
So yeah, well, we like to start every one of these the same way, with asking you the same question, which is for you to tell us how you got here.
That's a really profound question, and I'll try and hit some of the high marks because it's been quite a journey for me. I think at a very high level, I have a passion and for people, places, and things, and there are obviously a lot of industries that you can get into that perhaps get you closer to those. But through my journey through my business career, I've ended up in the hotel business, which is the personification of people, places, and things. I come to the hotel business through the real estate development business. That was my entree into understanding the world of how people react to buildings and how they use them. And I parlayed that experience into opening my first hotel in 2007 after being in the real estate business for probably, by then, maybe 15 years or something like that. And I got into it a little bit serendipitously. It wasn't necessarily on my radar to do, but once I got involved in the business, I really took to it, and I was able to use all of my skill set that I learned along the way in the real estate business, but then my own natural proclivity towards the hospitality industry, and tied them together, and sort of by now have created this really interesting network of hotels around the country.
Very cool. So one of the reasons why I wanted to chat with you today was because I feel like a Palisociety and its various brands underneath it kind of epitomize the trend towards more intimate, community-centered lodging. In New York, we have Ace Hotel. You're seeing a lot of these kind of Lifehouse as a brand. There's a lot of different brands popping up that are kind of almost the antithesis to Hilton and Marriott and more, with community viewing their hotel lobby maybe more as community centers and less as just amenities for the people paying for the rooms. I'd love if you could expand a little bit on your kind of community-centric mindset.
Absolutely. So the way to think about it really is that the hotel industry is very similar to a lot of other industries in that there tends to be consolidation that happens from time to time, where smaller companies, create a collection of hotels and get consolidated into larger companies. And by virtue of that, there's an industrialization of the hotel business, and that's just a natural evolution, and it's happened since the beginning of time, where smaller hotels become part of larger hotel chains. And there's been a real run of that over the last 10 years, and the byproduct of it is that there's a whole customer base that still is yearning for very neighborhood-centric hotels that really are connected to their neighborhoods. They speak to what's valuable about their community, and people in those local neighborhoods can champion them. And we're one of many that are doing that. We have our own particular spin on it, but there are now sort of a new crop of companies that are heavily focused in that direction. And the reason is because the customer is telling the lodging community that they don't want that to go away. So when boutique hotel companies become part of larger hotel companies, and perhaps they lose a little bit of their ability to connect to specific communities. Doesn't mean that customer goes away. And so as long as there's a customer for it, I think you're going to continue to see that, where you've got a group of hotel companies that are still trying to target that particular customer. And I think that we're one of a group that do quite well.
So it's funny, I remember hearing a story actually about Andre Balazs in the Standard Hotel, about how he refused to have like conferences or pharmaceutical like conferences or something. Like he would actively avoid them. And this is, obviously coming from the travel industry, like huge, like a lot of hotels seek those out. And I remember hearing the reason was that like these are not cool people to have staying at your spot. And that was, I remember one method for how he tried to like make his spots more community oriented. What like tactics have you used, maybe similar to that? Is it design? Is it like, channel distribution to basically fight off the corporatization, I guess you could say, of the hotel industry?
It's interesting. I think that we, on some level, deploy the no name tags, no balloons philosophy to a certain degree. I think that that's probably an extreme position, but I think that there's a certain customer base out there that wants a more curated experience that speaks to them in a very specific kind of way. And typically that's from a design and placemaking perspective. Obviously everyone likes good service, but when they go into a space, a brick and mortar space, they want to feel understood. And a lot of times that's through design and placemaking. And so the way that we do it, the way that we are sort of speak to our customer is definitely through design. And I think through design, you can, in essence, weed out a customer base that perhaps you're not pinpoint perfect for, whether that's a pharmaceutical conference or whatever it might be. We happen to, because of the kinds of hotels that we do, we tend to not have a lot of conference space. We leave that to a much larger hotels to do, and therefore they're getting a little bit more of the name tag and balloon crowd. So I think, that being said, I think there's an elegant way to do the kind of banquets and events and special experiences that you might want to have at your particular hotel. They just tend to be slightly smaller in nature, and they're slightly more targeted to a specific kind of event itself because of that nature. But I think that story that you heard early on, I think is just, there's always room for contrarian view in any business. And I think that was sort of the beginning of a contrarian, well, maybe not the beginning, but sort of a contrarian view, I think more to speak to a certain customer than anything else. And I don't know whether they're still doing that or not at Standard, but my sense is they probably have, that culture is probably still part of the equation on some basis, but I'm sure in a positive way.
So I want to rewind a little bit here. You mentioned you started Palisociety in 2007. Can you walk us how you went from one hotel to 18, 2007 to 2020?
Yeah, absolutely can. So, I started it as a real estate developer, and or I started in the real estate business, I would say, in the development business, and I worked my way up essentially in working for other people for a long time, and actually when I started the company, it was a development company, and we weren't in the hotel business at all, and just sort of serendipitously, the way that I actually got into it is sort of random, and that is that we developed and built a project in West Hollywood in Los Angeles here, and it was sort of a boutique residential condominium project. And at the time when we were marketing the project, we had these model units, these show units that people would come and tour when they were open to the public for people that wanted to buy. And I was in there one day, right when we first opened up, and a young couple was walking through, and they commented to themselves that if this was a hotel, and if this building was, if this unit was a hotel room and there was a little lobby and a cafe on the ground floor, that they thought that would be really interesting and a great idea. And I just sort of had an aha moment at that time. And I thought to myself, well, that's actually a very exciting idea. I didn't really know what being in the hotel business meant, but I thought that maybe I could take my skill set and my experience that I had sort of garnered to date and you'd use that and try to open my own version of what a hotel was. And that's, I embarked on that process, I think in 2004 or 5, and by late 2007, early 2008, I opened my first hotel, not too far from that particular building, called Pally House West Hollywood. And, at the beginning, I decided that instead of having a third party come and operate the hotel for me, that I was going to do it myself. And the reason I wanted to do it myself is I sort of had a very particular point of view about what I thought this particular hotel could be or should be. And that included, running the restaurant and the event space, not really event space, but like we had a very robust bar scene, and sort of at that time, I sort of had a vision for what I thought that should be from an outsider's point of view. And, I used that experience, and keep in mind at the time I was also still developing real estate and my, as part of my sort of legacy company. And I just dove in and learned the business in 2007 and 2008 and 2009. And I basically at that point just figured out what it was to have a hotel. And, I'm sort of glossing over all of the treachery and, the learning on the job part that I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs go through when they think it's a good idea, and there's obviously a lot of pitfalls. And I suppose if I knew what I was getting into, I perhaps may not have actually have done it because it is really quite challenging. But so I learned it from the ground up. I spent 3 years just learning the hotel business while I was sort of still, doing other things. And in 2011, I had an opportunity to do another hotel that sort of was a unique set of circumstances. And I opened my second hotel and dove into that.
Was this the Santa Monica one?
No, this one was on Melrose. This was called Pally Hotel on Melrose Avenue. And I didn't even know if that was going to work or not. It was a little bit of a, the first one was quite successful, but it's very hard to repeat. It's like everything else. You perhaps you're getting lucky for whatever reason. The hotel gods were with me, but the question is, can you do it again? And so went out and just bootstrapped another hotel project at the time, keeping in mind that I had a lot of development experience and construction experience and capital markets experience by then. So even though it was a bootstrapping kind of experience, I did it from a very educated point of view. But I opened my second hotel in 2011, leveraged those two hotels to be able to open my third, which was the Santa Monica Pally House in 2013. And so now I had a little collection of 3 hotels, all in relatively close proximity to each other, and utilized the next couple of years to figure out what it was like to have a mini hotel company. It was a small collection. We were a small regional operator. We were doing all the food and beverage, all the operations, and built a small little team. And we were very successful. And we were very successful, I think, because we were very targeted in what we were doing. And whatever mistakes we were making along the way, we were really did a good job that the customer was not experiencing them. They were maybe more growing pains internally about building a brand and building a company. And right around 2015, 2016, I had a little bit of an epiphany, I guess. And the epiphany was that the first 3 hotels that I did, I sort of created for myself. And what I mean by that is people don't just give you hotel projects to operate when you don't have any experience and when you don't have a brand and you don't really have anything other than, perhaps some passion. But I sort of, coming from a real estate development mindset, and by having made my first 3 hotels myself, I just thought that my destiny was to continue to build my own hotels for myself, and that was just the way that it was going to be. But what happened was that somebody approached me to do a hotel for them, utilizing our brand, and be more of a gun for hire than the actual sponsor of the project. And for some reason, maybe I was a little slow to the game, or maybe I was just so conditioned by then that I never even thought that was a possibility. So we ended up putting together. We made an arrangement with this particular owner to do a project for them, where we designed the hotel and we would operate it, and we would not take on the heavy lifting, and we would not take on the sponsor position. And that just opened up a floodgate of new opportunities. And so, by the time we closed out 2019, I think in between 2017 and 2019, we opened 6 hotels, so which is quite a clip. And so we utilized that momentum to create quite a large platform, and that's sort of the abridged version of how we went from sort of an idea to having a bona fide portfolio of hotels.
Avi, it's Kev here in the UK. Thanks for joining us. There's loads of things to kind of follow up on there. I'm interested that you said, you kind of almost by accident found yourself in the hotel business, and you decided to create that first one, and you didn't have any experience. I mean, as anyone who's listening and will know, there's everything from managing food and beverage to revenue management to distribution to marketing and all those kind of things. I mean, how did you, as a non-hospitality executive, kind of wrap your head around how to kind of deal with all those tasks? Did you just surround yourself with people that did have experience, or were you all in this kind of, let's just see what happens kind of thing?
It's a great question. I think if I look back on it now, I think that I had the luxury of having had a lot of success developing real estate and having partners and lenders and people in my orbit that, I had been successful with, and they had been successful with me with respect to, whether it's banks or investors, and having had made money. And so I had the confidence of being able to execute. Like, I knew I could build the building, and I knew that I could sort of use my capital, political capital, or my capital that I had with lenders and investors that would sort of take a little bit of a flyer with me to do more of a hotel project than a traditional, let's just say, condominium or whatever project that I was doing at the time. So I had that, which is a huge leg up. So I didn't have to necessarily go and do a lot of prospecting for raising capital, which I think is a huge plus. That's number one. Number two is, I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. So I always had a deep belief in my ability. I suppose I would say I had 75% belief. So that gave me a certain level of comfort, and 25% scared to death, which really fueled my ambition, because I just was not willing to fail. And I think lastly, I just wasn't afraid. I wasn't scared to do it. I knew what I liked as a customer of hotels. I knew I had deep local knowledge, and I knew what was missing in the market for this particular hotel that I was doing.
Yeah.
And I knew that if I delivered on my vision, come hell or high water, that I was going to be successful. And I knew that I was going to be able to attract a certain customer. I didn't know what that really meant, meaning I didn't know anything about, once somebody walked in the door and made a reservation, what actually happens after that. But I will say that early days I surrounded myself with a couple people that knew enough to allow me the opportunity to open the first property, and that I didn't make any, egregious errors in terms of process and what have you. So that was sort of my mindset at the time.
I'm interested, Avi. You talked about your previous career, if we can call it that, in real estate. I don't know if you studied design at school, or you did design at high school or university or anything like that, but everything that's written about you, and everything is about a design aesthetic and all that kind of thing. How intrinsically do you get involved in the minutiae of the actual design, or do you again bring in people that are shit hot designers that are going to be in tune with what they think you want from a design of a property?
That's a great question. And the answer is, and I know this is going to be hard to, people don't believe me when I say this, but I design everything. So
okay.
In terms of the interiors component, all of the placemaking aspects of it. And at the very beginning, I had other people come in and help me, because I didn't have my own design studio at the time. It was just me with a bunch of ideas. So I surrounded myself with some people that were really talented and helped me think it through. And I would say that the biggest mistakes that I made at the beginning were in the first hotel, were actually listening to other people in terms of the design prospect. Because if you've never done it before and you think that other people have, a lot of times you obviously are taking input from them. And I think what I learned on my going forward projects was to actually have no input from anybody in terms of what I wanted to do. I think that what I would say is that I have always had a very specific design aesthetic my whole life. It's not something that I'm trained in any way.
Right.
It's not something that I studied. And even today, I struggle because I don't have the vernacular on the design side. If I try to explain to one of the people in our design studio about how I want to make a project going forward, I have to kind of point to stuff, and because I don't have the vernacular about what it is. But I think one of the things about our projects is that they are very irreverent in terms of their design. Mm-hmm. And I love it that way. And that's because they're not at all formulaic. There's no design by committee. And they're not rooted in any legacy design norms. And so that's just something that I've always done from the very beginning.
And you talk about, or it's often written about these hotels, that they are, in step with the community, and they're places that you want the community to come in and enjoy, in the bars and all those kind of things. How do you go about doing your community discovery, or, customer discovery about how you want to design them? Is it based on the existing architecture of where it sits on the street, or is it about the people and the types of industries that are in a particular area? Is it full of lots of designy type people and startup people, or is it high-end city type, finance people?
My process is a little, I don't know how other people do it, so it's hard for me.
Right.
My process is a little different, I suppose. And my process is that, yes, all of those things, I suppose on some level filter into my thinking, but really the way that I go about placemaking, and I don't really, I guess design is the right word, to a certain degree, but what I really am thinking about is I create a narrative for something about the hotel, whether it's a fictitious owner, prior owner, or what is the local tribe in the community, or who something about it that allows me to tell a story about what a hotel is or shouldn't be. I'll give you a perfect example. When I was thinking about our hotel in Seattle, my idea that I was thinking to myself for the hotel rooms was to create a guest room perhaps your sort of nutty aunt had a guest room over her garage in the back of her house in Seattle. What does that feel like? Does it have heirlooms in it? What's the color scheme? It would be a place that you would absolutely love to stay. And it's so great. She doesn't even know how great it is. So that was my inspiration in the story that I told for the hotel rooms, and that trickled down into the rest of the space. So something like that. And that's hard to explain to an institutional partner because it is so esoteric, but because I created my own hotels myself with no filter, I proved my ability to use those narratives to be able to create the spaces. And so now I don't really get any input, from our partners about creating the spaces because they have been incredibly well received. So every hotel that I'm involved in has a weird story like that connected to it. Now, I'm not doing a story, the story that I'm telling I'm not trying to create, an African safari theme in, Portland. I don't think that that's a connection, right? I don't like that. But what I do like is to tell a story about something that's local and allow that to not be too on the nose about the community that we're in, because I think a lot of times people can get very on the nose about a design, like a surfboard in a beach town, which I think that's too lazy from my perspective. But I do like to, at the very least, if you're doing something in Miami, I think you should feel like you're in Miami, but there should be a story connected to it, which is quirky.
Kevin kind of asked part of this question and you answered kind of half of it, which is kind of like, how do you scale? And I think you started touching on that, right? So many of these brands that we now look at as thinking super, stale at some point were, small and potentially vibrant before they got stale. And you just went through this big transformation going from 3 to 18. And I think, you answered half this question, which is kind of like you're staying very personally involved, and each one has a new persona that's distinct from the last one while tying into the city. But maybe you can just elaborate a little bit more on how you've thought about, because at some point, right, are you currently the bottleneck then to every hotel then if you're doing it, or how have you thought about systematizing this?
Thank you for asking that question, because I get asked that question a lot. I never hold up the process ever. And the reason is that I have so much experience in terms of budget and timeline. And, before I built my first hotel, I developed over 2 million square feet of real estate in my career. And so I understand what it's like to, be on a really fast train. So the way that I do it now is we've created a studio internally, and that studio essentially executes my ideas as we go along. And so what I have the luxury of being now is the ability to point the studio in a direction and to be a little bit more of an editor than I am an actually originator of concepting. I can sort of push people in the right direction. But by having specific brand, what that really does is it also allows you to recreate a lot of, or repeat a lot of the things that make hotels very challenging to do, which is what we call OS&E, which is, a lot of the, the pencils, the pads, the uniforms, all the little minutia pieces, and there's thousands of them. But when you have a brand and a brand platform, that kind of goes away, because you can sort of reutilize that. You're obviously improving it over time, but you're improving it in small increments. But once you've created that, you can recreate that. And by me having the ability to tell a story about a hotel and be very specific about how I want it to look and feel, we can be very prolific in terms of the placemaking and creating that.
Just to jump in here for a second, Avi, and I ask this as respectfully as I can.
Please, you can go downtown with me.
Okay. Do you find it difficult to trust people? And I ask that because I would imagine there's so much trust that you have to put in people for them to replicate your vision or your idea about something. You are the filter with which things eventually go out to a property. But do you find that it takes a while for you to find the right people or trust the right people to take that vision forward?
No one's ever asked me that question before. The answer is probably perhaps a little bit of the opposite, where I still am going into almost all of my, professional collaborations with a very open mind and a lot of trust. On the design side, what I have found is I have this incredible team right now where there's a lot of trust, meaning that there's a sort of a rhythm by which we can work and create special stuff. So as we've grown as a company, we've been able to attract better talent. And when you get better talent, you can have more trust. And but for many years, there was a period of time where, the small group of people that I started with, we were doing everything. And so I think when we started to grow, I think it was definitely challenging to bring new people on. And we definitely had to try a lot of different people on for size, because most people came from very traditional lodging backgrounds. And our approach was so esoteric, I guess, in a way, or was very, we were very lean and mean, and a lot of people don't know how to be successful in that atmosphere. So we struggled, I think, early days with trying to find people that shared those same values. But again, the growth has allowed us to have a deeper bench and a lot more talent. And it's been incredibly refreshing to have some really great people on the team. But I would say overall, I'm not that jaded. I could be. I suppose I used to be more, but I think now we've got an incredible team. I know you hear this all the time. I'm sure you hear about the team thing. And I would always think to myself, oh gosh, what the hell are these people talking about? But now it's so true. When you've got great people as part of your team, it just really, you're able to just be a lot better at executing.
So I wanted to go back to kind of, you mentioned you kind of assembled your first three kind of in a more traditional way, kind of taking the property over yourself, you said, kind of being taking the biggest risk. And then for the rest of them, you haven't. And I think there's, the word franchising is kind of a dirty word at times because it evokes like Starbucks and McDonald's standardization, but there's a lot of different ways to kind of do things like that and manage it elegantly. So could you maybe give us some more details about how you went from 3 to 18 on a kind of maybe more business financial side, and when it comes to structure, and how did you negotiate those deals?
Yeah. So the good news about the hotel business is that there are a lot of industry standards about the way that hotel management agreements are set up. There's a lot of hotels. Most hotels are set up where there's an ownership group and then an operating group. And the lion's share of the operating groups tend to be very large flagged hotels that own thousands of, they operate thousands of hotels and millions of hotel rooms. And then, frankly, there's those people and then kind of everybody else. There's a precipitous drop between the very largest and then everybody else. It's like a huge drop. And when you're more of an independent operator, there's a whole world out there of what we call hotel management agreements or hotel operating agreements. And to be honest, when I was doing my first properties that I wasn't actually doing all the heavy lifting, I wasn't even that familiar with those myself. But you get real familiar real fast because it's a very, operating a hotel is a very complex enterprise, even for small ones, because there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that you have to talk about up front before you set foot in there, especially if you're growing a brand. But the good news, as I said, there is a sort of an industry standard about what that looks like. And then within that, the nuance of that, there are little things that change depending on what's valuable to the operator or what's valuable to the owner. And so there are sort of little differences that occur within them, things like how long they are, whether you can cancel them or not. Obviously, what your fee is, although the fee is pretty industry standard as well, depending on the size of the hotel. So I didn't have to recreate anything there other than what I did have to do. And now this is, and sort of if you hold that out for a second to go back on the real estate side, real estate structuring was something that I came to the hotel business with a lot of experience in. So one of the things that was interesting was that even though perhaps I wasn't the sponsor or doing the heavy lifting or wasn't the developer of the new hotels that we were doing beyond the original 3, I and my team were able to provide a lot of value and input to the process, because most of the time we were getting involved in hotels where we had the most development experience out of everybody sitting at the table. So we were able to, I think, be very accretive to the process, which I loved. I loved being able to say, hey, in my experience, this is the best way about approaching that. And so we were able to add that value. The hotel management agreements stuff we talked about. And so you get really proficient in how to provide service, to be a service provider. You have to learn how to transition into being a service provider as part of your skill set. And, and we just happen to do it a little bit different. And I'm happy to jump into that too.
Well, so I'm actually curious on that. So I from my experience, sometimes once you get onto one side here, I've dealt with people who operate who go, why would you ever own the property? And people who own the property goes like, well, why would you not own the property? That's where all the real estate value accrues to, depending on kind of, what side of the coin you're on. Like now that you've kind of transitioned away from doing the heavy lifting as you described it, would you ever go back and buy hotels, or have you kind of permanently switched to this model where you think it's more efficient to scale the other way?
The answer is that I would consider our model to be asset medium. Most people are asset in my business are mostly asset light, where they own no real estate or very little, and some people are like to develop, own, and operate their own assets. At two extremes of the equation. The issue with being the developer and to owning the hotels is that that's a real bottleneck, right? Because you can only operate as many hotels as you can, find, acquire, finance, build, develop, construct, and open. So that's a huge bottleneck for us. By finding local partners in the communities that we're in that have deep local knowledge and that play the developer role, it gives us so much more bandwidth to design, open, and operate these hotels. And I think we can become a much better, clear-headed partner. That being said, sometimes we do are part of the sponsorship team because the opportunity presents itself. Sometimes we make an investment in in the projects themselves, and sometimes we're just a gun for hire. I think I really like that model because I think it gives us flexibility to not have absolutes in terms of our approach. In all instances, we're always designing the hotels and we're always operating them, and so there's continuity that way. But I don't necessarily, I'm not a huge fan of hard and fast rules, especially for someone like myself who has a lot of real estate experience and can bring, that to the table. So I don't really have a hard and fast rule one way or the other. The one thing that we do stay away from for sure is we don't like to be the actual developer of the projects themselves, because that's a completely different skill set. And having a lot of experience there, I know that would really hold us up from growing our brand.
You said right at the beginning, Avi, when you answered our first question, and you said, these are some of the high marks. And for fear of being a journalist that's always looking for a negative story, I mean, I've been interested if you could highlight some of the low marks that you've had along the way and how you kind of got over them.
That's another great question, Kev. So here's what I would say. I think that when you're building a business and you're even in an industry that's fairly well known, you're carving your own path, I think that you make a lot of mistakes, not because you are purposely making bad decisions. I think you are making the best decisions that you can at the time, but sometimes they're not the right ones. And I think that there have been moments where things that either happen that are within your control or outside of your control, that every entrepreneur has to go through, that are very, very gut-wrenching. And whether, oh my gosh, just sort of getting up close and personal with what people actually do in hotels that, are beyond your wildest expectations, for example, and trying to figure out how to deal with that, and creating a set of SOPs related to the crazy shit that people do in hotels, or more profound, the crazy shit that people that work at hotels do, and getting your arms around that, and not in coming to it without really that perspective. I mean, it was a real, you need to have a really strong set of rules related to how you handle all of that. And when you're carving your own path, the only way you get there is by, going to the haunted house, and you not know when someone's going to come out of the corner and scare the crap out of you. It's sort of like that, and it's a lot. You have to really want to do it. It's like any other business. You have to really want to do. You have to be passionate about it. You have to be able to shrug off, some stuff that you never even in your wildest dreams thought you'd have to deal with. So, I would say that there's just lots of little things that kind of come up that you have to navigate around.
And this is a little question for us to finish on, if we can, Avi. It's almost impossible to read a story about you or an article about a new launch that doesn't mention how you dress. You're always talking about your snappy suits and he looks immaculate. I wonder whether, is that the brand following you, or is that you living the brand, or is that just the way you've always been?
It's the brand following me for sure. I've always had a sense for style,
Right.
and it's just something that I was born with, and it's just always been part of my life. And it's the one of the things I miss about COVID is not having an opportunity to get out there in the world, but and to wear some of the clothes. But no, I think that it's part of my DNA is to just try and bring some style to everything that I do, at least my own personal style. And I'm not saying it's for everybody, but it's definitely something that is important to me, and I definitely bringing into the hotels.
Okay. Avi Brosh, thank you very much. That was a really interesting interview. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Okay, you've been listening to another episode of How I Got Here. That's Mozio and PhocusWire's weekly podcast where we talk to the innovators and entrepreneurs in travel, tourism, and hospitality. If you're not a subscriber to this podcast already, you can do so by finding it on all the usual places. That's iTunes, Spotify, Alexa, Google Podcasts, all those places. Go on there, subscribe. You'll get the next episode in your inbox every week. So once again, thanks again to Avi. And on behalf of David and I, thank you very much to everybody for tuning in. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the How I Got Here podcast. We'll be back next week with more inside stories behind startups and innovation in travel and transportation. Check mozio.com/move for a complete write-up of the highlights of every podcast with translations into 5 languages. And get your daily dose of news on the digital travel economy by subscribing to the newsletter at PhocusWire.com. See you next week.